first applied for it. So I'm going to go ahead and share with you a presentation about the fellowship program. I'll provide some information on what the program is, some of the deadlines, some of the way the review process works, and a little bit about what to look for as you prepare or if you prepare applications of your own. Okay, so I hope everybody is seeing this okay. So before I begin, I want to also mention that a lot of the information I'm going to share with you today can be found on the NSF's website, specifically regarding the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. It's an excellent website. There's a lot of good information. I've got some links to it in the presentation. So anything that's unclear, or if you want the official line on things, certainly I encourage you to look at the site. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, when it comes to writing proposals and applying for grant funding or fellowships, usually the most important piece of information is the program solicitation. So this is a document, in this case it's about 20 pages long, that lays out all the information regarding the program, the deadlines, how the review process will work, when you expect to hear about it, how many will be awarded, and so forth. And that can be found through the program as a whole's website here. I think this link right here is specific to a PDF copy of the solicitation. So before ever applying for any fellowship or grant, it's very advisable that you take a look at the program solicitation. It's not that long. This one is in particular fairly straightforward and easy to read, and it really has all that information that you'll need. Now, as we get into it, I always like to begin with the deadlines because I'm a realist, like many of you, and I've been known to put things off perhaps a little too much. So it's always good to know when things are due. Okay, and I actually gave a version of this presentation back in the spring, and at that time there was actually a different solicitation in place. So I've updated this now to the most current guidelines, and these due dates have changed a little bit. So what I'm showing you here are the individual days in which proposals for the Graduate Research Fellowship Program are due in the different disciplines which are considered for the fellowship, okay? So for those of you in the life sciences, this would be biology probably, perhaps some other areas allied to that. The proposal is going to be due on Monday, October 19th, okay? So, you know, a little under 2 months away. The next day in that week, Tuesday, we have computer and information science and engineering and materials research, as well as psychology, social sciences, and STEM. We may have some people in those areas here. I've been mostly working with the College of Science. That's why I don't have these highlighted, but anybody in those areas, that's your due date. Wednesday for engineering disciplines, and then Thursday for the physical sciences. So chemistry, my field, as well as geosciences, mathematical sciences, physics, and astronomy. It's also important to note out, and we'll talk about, you know, how we submit these fellowships as we go along, but the due date is 5 p.m. local time of the applicant's mailing address. So this is your due date, and it's going to be due at 5 p.m. on that day, okay? All right, so a little bit about the NSF GRFP, or Graduate Research Fellowship Program. This text right here I've simply reproduced from the NSF's website. But I think it's a nice summary of what the basics of this program are. So as it says here, the purpose is to help ensure the quality, vitality, and diversity of the scientific and engineering workforce of the U.S. This program, okay, and you can read more of the text there, but this program at its heart seeks to identify and reward very promising students in the sciences and engineering and now in the STEM education fields, okay? And it wants to encourage your continual career progress into these fields to build the next generation of scientists and engineers in the country. And it does so by providing money for you to attend graduate programs in the United States. Okay? So as it says here, the GRFP provides 3 years of support for the graduate education of individuals who have demonstrated their potential for significant research achievements in STEM or STEM education. Okay? And you know, along with the priorities of the National Science Foundation, it's actively encouraging women, members of underrepresented groups, persons with disabilities, veterans, and undergraduate seniors to apply. And we'll talk about, in terms of seniors here, we'll talk about the categories of the various applications in a little bit. Okay. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, the National Science Foundation is a component of the federal government, okay, that funds basic research in the sciences, okay? Now, the NSF, in most scientists' opinion, is a very important and very revered organization or component of the federal government. It's not nearly as big as many other areas. So compared to, let's say, the National Institutes of Health or the Department of Energy or the Department of Defense, all of which also fund science research, it's much smaller and its focus is much more on basic science, okay? So unlike the National Institutes of Health, whose mission is to improve human health, the NSF is really just focused on basic science and the dissemination of new knowledge, okay? Now, within the NSF, the GRFP program is the oldest fellowship program in the country. It's been around for a long time. I forget the date, I could have looked it up, but I think it was the 50s or the 60s. So it's got a very storied history. It's been around for a long time, and it's really been an important launching pad for a lot of young students in their scientific careers. Now, what the fellowship, if awarded, will provide you is $138,000, okay? So that breaks it down into an annual stipend of $34,000, which is larger than many graduate programs across the country, not all, depending on the location and the cost of living in those areas, excuse me. But this is a very nice stipend for a PhD graduate student, okay? It's usually more than what the base level is at most universities. In addition to that stipend, it also provides a $12,000 cost of education allowance. That goes to the university. It could cover health insurance costs, it could cover tuition costs, a variety of different things. You won't see that money, but you will see the stipend, okay? Now, those are the tangible kind of rewards of this fellowship program, but the intangibles are much, much greater in my opinion. Students who receive this fellowship have much greater research flexibility, okay, because their principal investigator or the professor under whose guidance they're working doesn't have to provide a stipend for the student, and therefore what they work on doesn't have to be necessarily tied to a specific funded project area. So it gives the student much more flexibility in kind of what they pursue during their dissertation research. Oftentimes, it will mean that you'll get a release from teaching responsibilities. Typically, first-year graduate students at many programs have to teach, serve as TAs, that is, for a number of laboratory courses or otherwise. Having this fellowship will often get you out of those duties. And in addition, if you apply for this fellowship and are awarded it prior to starting your graduate program, it makes you immediately attractive to various prospective research advisors. Say you wanted to work in this group or that group, but maybe the PI already has a lot of students. Believe me, they'll be more than happy to accommodate another student if they're coming in with their own funding. And of course, beyond these things, it looks very good on your resume or your curriculum vitae as you apply for jobs in the future. Okay. Now, I want to take a moment and talk about something that's brand new to this fellowship program, and that is a new area of emphasis, okay? So this is a statement from the NSF's solicitation for the Graduate Research Fellowship Program this year, and it says that although NSF will continue to fund outstanding graduate research fellowships in all areas of science and engineering, in fiscal year 2021, which we're going into, the program will emphasize 3 high priority research areas in alignment with NSF goals. These are artificial intelligence, quantum information science, and computationally intensive research, okay? Now, this is, I'll tell you, actually been quite a point of contention among faculty across the United States. This is a link to a little news article in Chemical and Engineering News that covers this. It's got some further links to some interesting Twitter feeds if you want to read more. But faculty, by and large, have been opposed to this. Now, that being said, I don't think NSF plans to change this. Why faculty are upset is because we believe NSF should not specify emphasis areas in terms of science for these fellowships. They should simply be identifying the most deserving and most promising students, regardless of research area. There's actually a petition sent around to try to get NSF to change this. But as it stands now, at least in my reading of it, they will still be emphasizing these areas. So those of you who happen to be in computer science or use AI or computations in your research, it would be a good idea to accentuate that point in your applications, because as of now, they're still looking to prioritize those areas. And of course, NSF's been asked, does this mean there'll be more awards in these areas? They're not going to commit to answering that. But at the very least, for those of you who do have ties to these, it would be a good idea to probably, like I said, highlight that. All right. If you read through the program solicitation, you read through the information on the NSF GRFP website, and you still have questions, there are program officers. These are individuals who work with the NSF, work at the NSF to manage various programs, including the GRFP. They're very responsive. You can call this operations center here, or you can try to get in touch directly with the two program officers shown here. They're very good at answering questions and providing information if you have it. Now, these are typically very busy individuals, so if you do try to contact them directly, make sure you have very specific questions to present them with. Don't call them up and say, hey, can you tell me what I need to do to make sure I win this fellowship? They're not going to want to answer that, okay? Or they're just going to direct you to the information that's already present. So if you do need to contact them, again, try to have very directed questions that you'd ask of them. Okay. All right. Now, another important point before we get into the details of the application is eligibility. Okay, so we talked about deadlines, we talked about what the fellowship is. I think it's important also to mention who is eligible for this fellowship. So in general, you can apply for this fellowship only one time as either an undergraduate or a graduate student. So as an undergraduate, you may apply in your senior year as well as your baccalaureate time. However, that must occur before you begin your graduate training. So for those of you who are seniors right now and intend on applying to graduate school in the future or this fall, you may apply for this fellowship. Okay. You may also apply as a graduate student. Okay. But graduate students are limited to only one application, and you can submit that either in your first year of graduate study or in your second year after you've completed 1 year. You may also apply as an undergraduate, and if you're not awarded it, as a graduate student again. Okay. So you can apply twice, but you cannot apply twice if you're a graduate student. You may apply once as an undergraduate and once as a graduate student, but only one time total as a graduate student. And if that's unclear, when we get to the question and answer period, I can provide more. Okay. Now, in addition to that, applicants must be either U.S. citizens or U.S. Permanent residents. Okay, so citizens and green card holders are eligible to apply for the fellowship, but no others. Okay. Also, if you intend on applying to an MD PhD program, you will not be eligible for this fellowship. Okay. This program is looking to fund those students who are going into PhD programs in STEM and STEM education, not into joint degree programs with either medical or jurisprudence degrees associated with them. Okay, so no MD PhD, it must be just a PhD program. And once again, this is a link to a very nice section of the GRFP website that goes over a bunch of frequently asked questions. Many of those do correspond to eligibility requirements, so you can check that out as well. All right, now, for the rest of this presentation, I want to talk a little bit in more detail about what the application for the fellowship looks like. Okay, and again, all this information can be found in the program solicitation. The proposal application consists of several parts. The first part is just kind of personal, demographic, academic information. This will take the form of basically form fields that you will fill out on the website that we'll talk about in a minute. And that's pretty straightforward. It's not very difficult. You'll have two written documents that you have to produce. The first of which I'll call the personal statement. That's not actually what NSF calls it, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. And you'll have a research statement. Okay. Now for both of these, we have to make sure that you adhere to strict page limits. I'll present those in a minute. If you do not do so, or if you did not follow the formatting guidelines, your proposal will not be considered. Okay, it will be returned without review. So you've got your background information, you've got two statements you have to prepare. You then have to prepare two or more letters of recommendation. And we'll talk more about those in a minute. And then finally, you'll have to provide some form of an academic transcript. And these will then round out the components of the proposal application. Now, for your written documents, the personal statement and the research statement, NSF requires Times New Roman font, 11-point or greater, 1-inch margins, and it must be single-spaced or greater. Okay, and again, you can see these formatting guidelines in the program solicitation. Now, when I applied for this fellowship program 20-odd years ago, I think some of it was still submitted by mail. I can't remember at this point. But nowadays, all grants through NSF and NIH are submitted online, and NSF's portal for grant submission and review is known as FastLane. Okay, so this is a link to the NSF FastLane portal. You'll have to register with it before you submit anything. There's more instructions about that both at the FastLane portal and in the program solicitation. So again, as you're preparing this several weeks before the deadline, make sure you go on and register and create a FastLane account so that you'll be able to upload all these documents in a timely fashion. Okay. All right, so let's now talk in more detail about the aspects of that proposal. So the first is what I call the personal statement. NSF refers to it as the personal relevant background and future goals statement. And of the two documents you'll have to provide, this one is a little bit longer. It has a 3-page limit. Okay? Now, I view this document as an opportunity for you to discuss what you've done in the past, how that shaped what your career goals are going forward, okay? And to also talk about those activities in which you've participated that have expanded scientific participation. So we'll talk about that in a minute, okay? So what you're gonna do in this document, or what I recommend you do, is discuss your previous research experiences. So many of you are engaged in undergraduate research, or if you're now graduate students already, you've had a little bit of exposure to research, and you really want to describe what you've done here in very specific language. Okay? So, one thing that faculty often point to when we see written documents from students, whether this be personal statements in graduate school applications or something like fellowship applications, is that students are unable to discuss with a high degree of specificity what they've actually done, okay? And usually the better understanding you have of what you've done, the more you're able to write about it in specific terms, okay? That doesn't mean using a lot of technical jargon necessarily, but it means being able to identify, the project you worked on. What was the central idea? Okay? Why was it important? Why were you studying it? What specifically were your contributions to that project? And how did that help shape the project moving forward? Okay? So when I say specific, feel free to use a diagram. I think a lot of students write these documents as just, 3 pages of text, which as reviewers, we're not that excited to read. We'd love to see a figure or an image or something, that describes in more detail the type of science that you've done. Okay? Now I say in this statement, I think it's important to indicate how you've broadened scientific participation. And this goes back to the review criteria for the National Science Foundation. So I didn't mention this specifically, but the way that proposals are evaluated, and this includes research grants written by faculty and others, is through the NSF's 2 basic review criteria, which are scientific merit and broader impacts, okay? So scientific merit is kind of defined as the potential for the proposal to further scientific understanding, something like that. Whereas broader impacts refers to how the proposed work will expand access to science or improve society's appreciation of science kind of in a broad sense. Okay? So we've got scientific merit and broader impacts. I think that this personal relevant background and future goals statement is the best opportunity for you to make the case for broader impacts. So that can take on a number of forms. I think experience tutoring students, experience in student organizations that have a scientific aspect, all of these are great ways to showcase how you've really contributed to broader impacts in your career thus far, okay? So I think the broader impacts is really the best way, this personal statement is a great way to highlight broader impacts. And I'll show you some specific examples of that in a minute. Okay? So with this statement, you want to set up your motivations for why you're pursuing graduate study. You want to talk a little bit about what your career goals are, how they've been shaped by your previous experience. You want to go into detail on that experience, especially as it pertains to scientific activities. And you want to highlight what you've done thus far that demonstrates the broader impacts of your work. Okay? That's how I view what this personal statement should entail. Okay? So that's the first of the two documents. Now, the second one is your so-called graduate research plan statement. Okay? And this document is only 2 pages and should be treated as if it was kind of a formal research proposal. What you're trying to do with this statement is to lay out your proposed research activities. Okay, that's the purpose of this statement. You're going to describe what you intend to do. Now, a question I always get is, well, I'm a senior undergraduate. I haven't even decided which graduate school I'm going to go to. How is it even possible for me to come up with a well-formulated research plan? And the answer to that is, as reviewers, we're not looking at necessarily the quality of the research project itself here. What we're looking for is if applicants are able to describe a coherent, logical kind of scientific question and how they'll go about answering that. Now, if you're already a graduate student, this graduate research plan statement will be, or can be, really formulated with input from your current research advisor. Maybe you're already on a project, maybe you've already been collecting data. Certainly an extension of that project you should write up for this research plan statement. For those of you who are undergraduates, maybe you have some ideas about the project you're currently working on as an undergraduate that could push it forward. These may not correspond to what you're going to work on when you get to graduate school. It doesn't matter. Unlike a grant proposal, the purpose of the GRFP is not to fund a project. It's to fund an individual. Okay? So no matter what you write as this graduate research plan statement, you could throw it in the garbage the day after you're awarded this fellowship. It doesn't matter. Okay? They're funding your ideas or your potential. They're not funding the project. Okay? Now, 2 pages is a pretty short amount of room to write out kind of a well-formulated research plan. But even though it is short, I always state that this proposal, this research plan, should have a well-defined hypothesis. It should have a well-defined, well-articulated central idea that you want to test. Okay? And then it should also have 2 or 3 specific aims that are going to test that hypothesis. Okay? So 2 or 3 actual kind of project areas or things you want to do that will test that hypothesis. Okay? Now, this section, in addition to the previous one, will really be a way of evaluating the intellectual merit or scientific merit, that's what I called it, it's intellectual merit of the proposal. Okay? Does this applicant really, understand the area of science or engineering or STEM that they're proposing to go into? Can they come up with a well-grounded hypothesis or scientific question? Okay, and are they able to communicate how they're going to test that hypothesis? In addition, as I said here, broader impact should also be discussed. This could be very brief, though. This could simply take the form of how the scientific question that you're testing is important to society at large. Okay? It doesn't have to go into specifics about activities you yourself have done. Okay? So we've got the personal statement and we've got the research statement, 3 pages and 2 pages. Both should be well written. Okay? Both should be as specific as possible. Do not be vague. Okay? And both should really communicate the intellectual merit and broader impacts that NSF review is kind of based on. Okay? All right. In a minute, I'm going to show you some actual reviews that I've written on applications that show you how we evaluate these ideas of intellectual merit and broader impacts. But before I get to that, I want to just say a few words about letters of recommendation. Okay? Now, there's going to be a lot of people applying for this fellowship from all over the country, and they'll be applying from very prestigious programs like Harvard and MIT and so forth. So there's a great deal of competition. That being said, UTSA students have been awarded these fellowships in the past. And in fact, we typically have 1 or 2 students who receive these each year, okay? So by no means are you guys, you know, not in the realm of competition here. You're absolutely going to be able to compete for these. One aspect of this application, though, that does stand out, in addition to everything else, are letters of recommendation, okay? So these really need to be exceptional, okay? I'll tell you about the review process in a minute, but as reviewers, we're seeing a lot of these applications, so we're really looking for things that set them apart from the others. And letters of recommendation are really one, okay? So these need to be great. So how do you do that? How do you make a letter of recommendation great? Well, the best way to do that is to choose mentors, choose letter writers who you know well, first and foremost. And as I say here, who are also good at writing letters, although that's a little bit beyond your control. But you want to choose mentors who know you well. Do not ask a professor with whom you've taken one class outside your major to write you one of these letters. You need to choose people, okay, who've worked with you, ideally in a research capacity, okay, or if it is in an instructional capacity, who've probably taught you more than one class, okay, and can really, you know, attest to your promise and your abilities in science. You can also help them. You can help them to write these letters by explaining that they need to not only address your exceptional academic accomplishments and potential in research, but also how you excel in broadening scientific participation, which gets us back to that idea of broader impacts, okay? So really an effective letter of recommendation will not only discuss your accomplishments in the classroom and in the research laboratory, your abilities as a scientist, and how that shows promise moving forward, but we'll also touch on maybe some of the other activities you've been engaged in that have helped really broaden scientific participation. Okay? Now, these letters of recommendation, are due October 30th. So it's a great idea to get in contact now if you plan on submitting an application. So right now, this week, contact your possible letter writers. Let them know you intend to apply for this for this fellowship program. The due date for the letters of recommendation is October 30th. And if they agree to write the letter, you'll be entering their names and contact information into the FastLane portal, and then they'll be contacted directly via automated email by NSF to submit their letters. Okay, so you don't have to worry about them sending physical copies of anything anywhere. Okay, and it also doesn't hurt, okay, to give them gentle reminders as the deadline draws near that they need to get those letters in. Faculty members are very busy. You know, we're engaged in many things. We have a lot of things going on. It's very easy for us to forget that we have these letters of recommendation due, and we appreciate being reminded. Okay, we appreciate being reminded. All right, now, another question that often comes up is, who should I choose? Meaning, you know, is it okay to choose instructors, or should they all be professors? Or what about somebody who I work with, but, you know, they don't really, you know, fit into that mold? And again, I think the most important thing, the most important thing is to choose people who know you well, okay? So if you've worked with somebody in a strong capacity or, you know, close capacity for a while, and they can really comment on all these aspects of your character and your promise, then I think it's good, okay? In general, just because the vast majority of reviewers will be university faculty members, they're probably going to hold letters of recommendation from professors in a little bit higher regard. It's not necessarily fair, but it's just the way it is. Okay. All right. Now, in the last few slides, I want to talk about the review process and actually show you some examples. So the funding rate for the NSF GRFP is about 12%. That's very low. It's very competitive. Okay. That's even lower than the funding rate for many research grants, which are still also incredibly low, like 15 to 20%. Okay? The NSF anticipates awarding about 1,600 fellowships, okay? But that's across all fields. That's across all of science, all of engineering, all of STEM education, all of psychology, and so forth. Okay? Now, unlike a standard research proposal, and I've also served on panels for normal NSF grants as well, the GRFP program is very different. Okay? On a normal NSF panel where we're reviewing research proposals from professors, we typically, the panel itself will have about 20 proposals, of which I'll be responsible primarily for maybe 3 or 4 or 5. For the GRFP, the panel is going to have over 200 applications, okay? And an individual reviewer will have to evaluate about 30 or more proposals, okay? So it's a very different task than a typical research grant review panel, okay? Now, what does this mean? This means as reviewers, we're looking at a lot of proposals, and many of these proposals come from very talented individuals. So to secure this award, you really have to stand out in a field of very talented people, okay? And that can be difficult. But at the end of the day, the best way to do that is to really make the case, again, for intellectual merit and for broader impacts, okay? Now, intellectual merit can also fall back on some of your basic resume or CV things, okay? So because we have a large number of applicants, simple metrics can jump out. GPA can be weighted very highly. Now, another question I get, is there like a cutoff? If my GPA is below X, should I not even consider applying? The answer is no. GPA, there's no hard or fast kind of threshold in terms of GPA. I will tell you, though, that the majority of highly scored applications typically feature undergraduate GPAs. We don't care so much about graduate GPAs, but they feature undergraduate GPAs above a 3.8, okay, usually above 3.85. Okay, that's just the way it is. In addition to GPA, the number of conference presentations you guys have given, whether that's posters or otherwise, those can be weighted pretty highly. Leadership positions that you might hold in various organizations are also considered quite highly. Awards you may have won, and maybe publications. We don't expect students at this point in their career to have many, if any, publications. That's not weighted very highly, but it will stand out if you do have it. Okay? All right, and finally, I want to show you 2 review summary statements that I'd written in the past. I've redacted them, so there's no identifying information, that show you what a review of a highly scored application will look like and what a review of a not so highly scored application will look like, and what that means in terms of what I've kind of gotten from the application itself, at least upon my reading. So the first example we'll look at is a high score, okay? And I went back and checked, and the student was awarded the fellowship. This is from several years ago. Okay? So as reviewers, we have to comment on the intellectual merit and the broader impacts, and then we have a summary statement. And we score the intellectual merit and broader impacts as either poor, fair, good, very good, or exceptional, okay? Which doesn't really mean much because then we also have to assign a numeric score at the end of the day. So for this application, I rated the intellectual merit very good. And I stated that the applicant has an exceptional academic record. So that means they had a good GPA probably. They were active, maybe in giving some presentations at conferences and undergraduate research and so forth. So they had an exceptional academic record and a myriad of research experiences that place her or him in a position to succeed in graduate school. She or he his or her proposal aims to create such and such. This proposal presents several specific aims designed to address the central goal. Some improvements to the proposal would be a clearer exposition of the central hypothesis. So what this means is as follows. I found the applicant's background very good, which told me that they're in a position to succeed in graduate school. So what they've done in the past is good. In terms of their research plan, okay, I thought they did a pretty good job. They identified a question, shown here redacted, and presented some specific aims to test it. However, the question they put forward probably wasn't that clearly explained. So I said that, you know, one of the main improvements they could have was a clear exposition of that central hypothesis. This is a very common critique I give because students at this point in their career are just not used to writing proposals, and I don't fault them that highly for it. Okay? So that's intellectual merit. In terms of broader impacts, I said that they were excellent. Okay? In the personal statement, there you go, the applicant clearly describes their experiences at such and such university with the LSAMP program and how this participation, whoops, forgot to redact that, led to measurable success with student participants. Furthermore, the applicant expresses a desire to pursue an academic career with the goal of broadening educational access to underrepresented groups. As a member of such a group, the applicant approaches this goal with unique knowledge of the challenge and proffers a specific plan, there's that specificity, to address this goal in his or her future career. Okay? Summary statement, this application is very strong in both intellectual merit and broader impacts. The applicant's research and teaching experiences form an excellent foundation for the scientific proposal. The letters of support are also very strong. And I scored this a 45 out of 50, which is an exceptionally high score for me. I try to use that full 0 to 50 range when I score these. The NSF, don't worry, they account for the differences in the way people scores things. They have what's called a Z-score, which basically is, takes into account whether you score things on average higher or lower and so forth, okay? But this was a good application and it ended up being awarded. On the other side, here's a lower score, okay? I gave this a 32 out of 50, which is closer to an average score. The intellectual merit I also rated very good. I said the applicant does an exemplary job of summarizing her or his previous research experiences and clearly states how his choice of graduate program fits with the research goals and scientific proposal. The scientific proposal is also original and it builds off of their previous research experience in this area. The proposal would benefit from a clearer statement of the hypothesis, there I go again, and a more systematic description of how it would be tested. Okay? So again, I scored it very good. This last statement is really just, to give them constructive feedback. Where this proposal really fell short was in the broader impact, which I rated fair. I said the applicant notes several examples of activities that they plan to pursue during their career that increase public awareness of science. However, these activities are not particularly well developed, they're lacking in specificity, and the applicant does not list any comparable activities during their undergraduate tenure that demonstrate prior experience with outreach. In other words, they're proposing to do a few things, but there's no confidence they'll carry forward with that because they haven't demonstrated in the past any experience doing these activities. Specific demonstration of previous activities geared toward outreach and how such experiences have shaped the applicant's view of science outreach would significantly strengthen the broader impacts. Okay? So in my summary statement, I said the application seeks to do this and that. The intellectual merit is strong but could be improved in the proposal. The broader impacts need significant improvement and the applicant is encouraged to consider this section more deeply. Okay? And this, unfortunately, was not awarded. So, again, when we're looking to review these applications, okay, we're looking at your background, we're looking at how well you can write that research proposal, but we're also looking at what those broader impacts are. Have you been active in the past? Do you intend to continue with these activities? And we want some demonstration of your commitment to this idea of broader impacts. Okay? So if you say, I did some outreach in the past, I'm going to do some more when I get to graduate school. That's not good enough. Identify something specific that you're going to do. Okay? Because to be vague doesn't give us confidence in your sincerity to pursue those activities. Okay? All right. I think that's about what I wanted to say in terms of the fellowship program. I've probably missed some things, but if you guys have questions right now, I'd be happy to try to answer those as it pertains to the program.